forward. Well, a hearty welcome to everyone who has come here today. This welcome is on behalf of the Seniorlawday Collaborative. My name is Elena Falcone. I am a co-chair of the Seniorlawday Collaborative, along with my wonderful pals in this, Sarah Steckler from Keen and Bean and Melinda Bellis from Legal Services of Hudson Valley. And today we are ably assisted and guided by Bruce Siegel, who has been our marketing consultant and just overall organizer for everything that we've been doing in the last year. The Seniorlawday Collaborative is an organization that is fueled by more than 150 professionals, attorneys, financial planners, geriatric care managers, librarians, Medicare specialists, and others. And we're all pretty passionate about sharing information of relevance to older adults and their caregivers. If this is your first program with us, I hope you've had a chance to explore our website, which is seniorlawday.info. I'm going to just take a quick moment to share my screen. And it looks like I can share. Great. So seniorlawday.info is our website. This has recordings of all of our past webinars, and we've been going gangbusters since the pandemic started. Something that's almost every week or every other week has been taking place. We also have resources that you can use right now. We have our Elder Law Q&A, which is located here under resources. It is a fabulous reference. We have information on online tools that you could use to evaluate health topics. And we also have the ever popular Ask Us button. So if you click on this button, you're able to submit a question into us. Sometimes we have live chat available. So if questions come up based on anything that you've seen on our website, or a question occurs to you after you listen to this presentation, you can shoot that question in here, and we will get back to you just as soon as we can. And I want to also flag, I'm going to go back to this homepage. We have our free consultation day coming up. It's on February 18th, and registration is supposed to open on February 17th, but you guys are here today, so the registration link is actually open. Shh. It's going to be open until about noon. And so today, if you want to take that opportunity to register for a free consultation with one of our collaborative team members, please take advantage of that opportunity. So now let me stop that presentation. So today we get to learn from Deborah Truhowsky, on the topic of the rights of nursing home residents and their families during COVID-19. This is a topic that I personally have had questions about, and I think I could say, I probably speak for many of you that friends, family members, those in our network are certainly asking us questions or raising these questions. And we just know, and as a librarian, I know that these questions are coming in from the community. Ms. Truhowsky's firm represents individuals and families when neglect or abuse has taken place in a nursing home, a hospital, or an assisted living or any other home care setting. She is an advocate for those living in long-term care, and she serves as the president of the board of the Long-Term Care Community Coalition. So I certainly feel confident that she has the expertise to bring this topic to us. So this is what's fabulous about the Seniorlawday Collaborative, getting to learn from experts and being able to ask our questions. If you have a question during this program, please send it in through the Q&A option on your screen. Some of you have sent in questions in advance, and we have noted those. And Deborah has generously said that when it comes up, I can certainly interrupt her, which I will do carefully. But please send the questions in. It's always much more engaging for all of us when we can sort of get the on-the-ground experience that you have. With that, Deborah, let me turn it over to you. And I think Bruce is going to be helping you out with the presentation today. So your hands free.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Bruce, for your assistance with PowerPoint. It's wonderful to be here with everyone today. Good morning. I'm so glad that you could join us. So I realize that it has been an incredibly difficult and challenging year for those living in nursing homes, those who have family members in nursing homes, and the staff in nursing homes. My goal today is to provide you with basic rights of nursing home residents that haven't changed even though we're in the midst of a pandemic. Also, I want to share with you tips from my years of practicing and advocating in the area of nursing home neglect and abuse. I also want to share with you the latest federal and New York State guidelines on visitation. And lastly, I want to share with you some information that I've gathered with respect to what happens after vaccination for us individually, as well as for those in long-term care and seniors living in the community. So turning to the first, that slide. So I want to share with you that there are statutes both at the federal level and at the state level that protect nursing home residents. And just briefly going through those statutes. So at the federal level, we have the Nursing Home Reform Act. And this Nursing Home Reform Act was first enacted in 1987 and it was updated in 2016. We also have federal regulations that dictate and address what care nursing home residents should be receiving. Also at the state level, we have the Public Health Law, Section 2801D. And similarly, there are also New York State regulations with respect to care in nursing homes, adult homes, assisted living residents, and in the home care setting. And these regulations, again, have not changed even though we are in the midst of a pandemic. And I'm going to speak to you in the next slide with respect to the New York State statute, because it is a powerful statute. So on the next slide, it is Public Health Law Section 2801D. And as I mentioned, it is a powerful statute. And I'll just read that first bullet because I think it encapsulizes well this statute. So any residential healthcare facility that deprives any patient of the facility of any right or benefit shall be liable to the patient for the injuries suffered as a result of that deprivation, except as hereinafter provided. And so when the statute talks about a right or benefit, one of the things it's referring to is the federal regulations, the state regulations that dictate care, also any contract between the nursing home and the individual. And except as hereinafter provided would address a situation where if a nursing home resident was injured, and it was shown that a particular regulation in terms of care was violated, the only way that that nursing home would not be responsible or liable to that resident would be if the facility was able to show that they took all steps reasonably necessary to have prevented that particular occurrence. And I'll give some examples of that as we go along. So that's a pretty powerful statute.
Deborah, can I ask a question that actually speaks directly to this?
Sure.
Oh, it's just, sorry, it just can't, there's actually two of them. If I understand right or benefit correctly, if an assisted living facility, for example, no, actually it's a phone. So if someone is living someplace and a phone is consistently placed by an aide out of reach, is that a right or benefit? And how do you complain about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very specific with respect to the phone, but there are regulations about quality of care and residents' rights. And is this I'm sorry, Elena, is this what setting is this in? Assisted living?
This is actually, so this may be an at-home, it's not clear if a mom has the mom's aides move it far from her so she can't answer it, and then they tell her that she doesn't want to talk to me. So that's like, but the right or benefit to communicate. Another question is specific to believe a nursing home Parkinson's patient who has to take meds at a scheduled time. The schedule is really important, but the aides are not consistently following it. So doesn't the Parkinson's patient have the right to sort of self-care? I mean, these may be too gnarly at this stage, but they're both sort of about their rights and the rights of the individual patient.
Right. And I think a good premise to look at, and I'll address a nursing home just for the moment, is that this is someone's home and they have the rights. Someone doesn't lose their rights or have less rights when they move into a nursing home or assisted living facility. And there's even a Bill of Rights, a nursing home Bill of Rights that is established through the statutes. And it's something that really speaks to the fact that people have rights. And so if an aide is doing that with the phone, it's completely unacceptable. And that complaint, if it should just continue to be escalated. And so if the aide is doing this and the aide doesn't change what they're doing, then speak with a nurse, speak with a nursing supervisor, go to the director of nursing, and take it all the way up to the administrator if necessary. Because especially in a nursing, especially right now with COVID, the phone may be the only means of communication that the family has. And as I'll get to in a few minutes, that ability to touch base and speak to the resident is very important to assess how they're doing. Also for the residents' psychosocial well-being, to have that interaction with family and friends at this point. So that's really completely unacceptable. And with respect to the medication question, that is very disturbing that the facility is not complying with the doctor's instructions with respect to when this medication should be administered. And similarly, that complaint should just be, escalated to the point where it's addressed. And as I'll comment a little bit later, but I'll mention it now, the ombudsman in the nursing home, there is a federal ombudsman program in our country, and each state implements that ombudsman program. And that is another resource that residents and family members have. The ombudsman is a great intermediary between the facility and the resident or the family. And I would encourage people to contact that individual. And when we get to that slide, I actually have a phone number for the Westchester County Ombudsman to share with everyone so that they'll have that number at their disposal.
Thank you. Okay, go forward. They were just right on point.
Okay, you're welcome. So on the next slide, what I want to just share with everyone is that there is a standard of good and accepted nursing home care based upon the federal and the New York State regulations, and it involves a repetitive analysis. For example, when each resident comes into a facility, they are to be assessed. And the purpose of the assessment is to determine what specific needs that resident has. And from that assessment, there is supposed to be a plan of care developed. It's required. A plan of care is to be developed based on that particular person's assessment. And that care plan needs to have the interventions that are required based upon what risk factors that particular resident has. Then the next level is, the most important part is, those interventions then actually have to be implemented to make sure that the resident is receiving the patient-centric care that they actually need. And of course, the assessments and care plans and interventions also need to be updated because people's conditions change. For example, if someone comes into the facility as an Alzheimer's patient, as their disease progresses, their needs upon admission may change 5-6 months down the road. And so things need to be updated as the person's particular conditions change. Then I wanted to share with you in the next slide, I wanted to speak about some of the New York State regulations, and just to make people aware that these regulations exist. And the 4 I've chosen are based upon things that we're commonly seeing in our practice when families are contacting us. So first and most important, especially during this COVID pandemic, I want everyone to know that there is actually a quality of care regulation in the New York State regulations. And I'll just read it because it is important, and I want everyone to be aware of it. So each resident must receive, and the facility must provide, the necessary care and services to attain and maintain the highest practicable physical, mental, and psychosocial well-being in accordance with the comprehensive assessment that we spoke about, the plan of care, subject to the resident's right of self-determination. What those last few words about self-determination would mean is that if a resident had the cognitive ability to say, I don't want you to do a certain thing, and the person was able to freely make that decision, well, then they don't have to do something. But barring that, the facility does have these quality of care requirements. And I repeat, that hasn't changed because we're in the midst of a pandemic. That is still applicable. And under this section 415.12, and NYCRR stands for New York Code Rules and Regulations. And that's where these regulations are found. And then on the next slide, also under this broad category of quality of care, is a particular section that deals with pressure sores. Pressure sores may also be called bed sores, pressure ulcers. They all mean the same thing. And again, I'm basing this on things that we unfortunately see in our practice, in my opinion, too frequently. And this is a very powerful regulation. And that first line says the word ensure, that based upon the assessment of a resident, the facility shall ensure that the resident who enters without pressure sores does not develop them unless their condition demonstrates that they were unavoidable despite every reasonable effort to prevent them. And what that basically means is that the only way a pressure sore, a facility would not be liable for the development of a pressure sore in a facility is if they demonstrated that they took every reasonable effort to try to prevent that. And there are a lot of things that could be done to prevent that. We don't have that much time today, so I don't want to go into too much detail. And similarly, this regulation also has another provision about ensuring that if a resident does have pressure sores, that they receive the necessary treatment to promote healing, prevent infection, and prevent new sores. And what that basically means is that if someone comes into the facility with a pressure ulcer, it is incumbent upon the facility to do everything that they can to try to heal that pressure sore. They can't just say, well, the person came in with it. They have an obligation to do everything they can to try to heal that pressure sore. The next regulation.
Deborah, can you speak to what might be the actions that people should be seen to take? I personally have worked as a volunteer chaplain at places and have pressure sores were not uncommon. Mm-hmm. So what actions should people have been looking for to make sure that it was being treated appropriately so it could be avoided?
Sure, I'd be glad to speak to that. So pressure sores, it sounds like sometimes it's thought, well, what happens? How do these things happen? Well, they basically come from unrelieved pressure. So it's not really, some unclear situation. They come from unrelieved pressure. And when someone is in a nursing home, for example, if they're in bed for long periods of time and they're lying in one position, that's a lot of pressure to that particular area. Or if someone is sitting in a chair, a lot of times families will say to me, well, I want someone up and out of bed, or I think that that's important. And sometimes facilities may have someone sitting at the nurse's station for hours. That is a lot of pressure on someone's lower back. For example, that's one of the common areas that bed sores can develop in the sacral area, the buttocks area. And you or I, if we're sitting in a chair, we move around a lot. But if someone has cognitive difficulties, if someone is too weak to shift themselves, then they literally could be in that same position for hours on end. So there are different things that could be done. Turning and positioning. If in bed, you or I may be able to freely turn ourselves in bed. But if someone doesn't have that ability, or again, cognitively loses the ability to realize they should be doing that, if someone doesn't have the ability to turn and position themselves, then the facility, based on an assessment and a care plan, would develop a system that someone needs to be turned and repositioned every 2 hours. That's one intervention. Also, if someone is in a chair, typically, the experts will say that every hour someone should be repositioned in the chair. There are also special surfaces in the bed, different types of mattresses for pressure reduction, pressure relief. There are also different cushions for the chair that can be used depending upon the person's situation. Something else that can cause skin breakdown is if someone is in some type of wet or soiled diaper. So if a facility isn't changing someone on a timely basis, that wetness can cause the skin to be irritated and can also be a factor in skin breakdown. Also, proper nutrition and proper hydration. The skin is an organ, and if it's not hydrated or proper nutrition, then all those factors coming together can cause someone to have skin breakdown.
All right, so there's a lot of keeping an eye on things and trying to look ahead to how the care is being delivered to see if your relative or friend is being moved sufficiently to look at the whole package of care. Which is
Right.
why sources are probably so hard to really complain about, who's responsible, because there's a whole bunch of people and actions that are influencing that safety.
Well, I think, there is this care plan, and the nursing staff is responsible for that. The doctor has input with respect to that at the nursing home, and then the aides are implementing it. So, if a family or a friend is noticing something, then in my opinion, I would go to the nurse at the facility. And again, if that doesn't solve the problem, just keep escalating it. But the nurses would be able to speak to what's in the care plan, and if the care plan is being carried out properly. If someone is I know right now, unfortunately, people just aren't able to visit the way they used to. But if someone's always on their back, then, and they can't turn and position themselves, then that's something, or they don't cognitively know to turn and position themselves, then that's something to question. Also, I always recommend looking at someone's body when people have that chance. Again, right now, I know that visitation is so limited, but and one of the things in the tips, but I'll speak to it now, is often I'll hear families say to me, well, a facility told me there's a rule that I have to leave the room when my mom or dad, for example, is being turned. And I have never seen that rule. Facilities can be concerned with privacy, HIPAA requirements, but if someone is the healthcare agent, if someone is the guardian of the person, if someone is the surrogate decision maker under the Family Healthcare Decisions Act, or simply if the resident says, my daughter can stay in the room when I'm being changed, they can stay in that room. And I think it's very important to look at the areas that you don't typically see when someone is clothed, because pressure ulcers or bed sores are happening where we can't see them. Someone could be dressed, look okay, and there's a bed sore. So it's important to look at the heels, the low back area, the buttocks, the hips, even the elbows. Any bony prominence that could be resting on a bed is an important area to look at. And there's a way of doing it. I think oftentimes facilities may say that because they just want to come in and get out and do what they have to do because they have a lot to do. So I suggest just saying, I won't get in your way, I'll stay back here, but be close enough that you can look if someone has an adult diaper, for example, and when it's being removed, to see if there's any redness or any type of problems with the skin.
So for the questions that have come in regarding this, you've given us kind of the escalation of the chain of command to talk to about this, things to look for, and since we can't often be present to look ourselves, would the patient themselves also know this is not right? They would feel uncomfortable, they'd be in pain. They could also you could ask them, hey, Dad, are you being moved? How often does a nurse come in if that person is able to speak to you? But they would also know if they have a pressure sore.
Yeah, great points. If someone has pain, and sometimes someone might complain of low back pain, and someone may think, well, maybe they have arthritis, it's back pain, but it may not be. So, someone may not be able to verbalize or particularize exactly what's causing that pain, but if they have pain, it's always important to figure out why they have that, and to explore that further.
Thank you. Again, the questions are coming in, so keep going. I know you have a lot to share.
You're welcome. So on this next slide about accidents, so I also wanted to share that there is a specific New York State regulation that deals with accidents. And again, it's a powerfully worded statute because it has the word ensure, which is a strong standard. And so this particular regulation speaks to that the resident's environment is free of accident hazards. And also that second point, which I think is really the most important point that I see in terms of accidents, is that the resident receives adequate supervision and assistive devices to prevent accidents. And that's very important. And similarly, as with pressure ulcers, there are a lot of steps that can be taken in order to prevent accidents. And sometimes people will comment, well, people are frail, they're unsteady, they're going to fall. And yes, that's true. People are frail and unsteady and they may fall. But there are a lot of steps that need to be taken to try to prevent that from happening, again, based upon the person's assessment and the care plan. And if you want, I can speak to a couple of those interventions with respect to that also. There are, and again, I'm giving sort of a generalization, and depending on the resident, there are specific factors that should or shouldn't, that are not appropriate. For example, mats on the floor. If someone is at risk of rolling out of bed, mats on the floor would, of course, cushion any type of fall to prevent more serious injuries. Also, lowering a bed or having a low bed if there's a risk of someone rolling out of the bed, with the theory being that if someone is going to roll out, it's much better to fall a shorter distance than a higher distance. Also, making sure that a call bell is within reach if the resident is able to use the call bell. Also, a bed alarm or a chair alarm if someone is at risk for just getting up. In our office, we handle a lot of cases with falls, and especially falls that can be happening during the nighttime. People don't, for years, if someone had to go to the bathroom, they would get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom. And they may not remember, if they have cognitive deficits, that they're not supposed to do that, or they're too weak to do that. So a lot of the fall cases that we handle happen in the middle of the night when someone's getting up. So the purpose of a bed alarm is that typically someone isn't jumping up out of bed. It's a process. They're, getting themselves positioned, they're struggling, they're getting out. So the benefit of a bed alarm is that it alerts the staff that that resident is on the move and trying to get out. And so the theory being, by the time they get out, someone is there before that to prevent that, so that that they're protected and they're supervised. So those are just some examples of things that can be done with respect to falls.
And I'm just going to give you a heads up that we have a couple of questions coming in specifically about how to navigate this in a COVID restricted facility, and for those who may have cognitive disabilities, as well as being in a nursing home. So you tell me when it's a good time to answer that kind of question.
Okay. When we get to the tips slide, which is coming up soon, we can address that during that period.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so the next slide deals with, also under this quality of care heading, deals with nutrition and hydration. And again, the regulation has that word ensure, that the facility shall ensure that the resident maintains acceptable parameters of nutritional status, such as body weight, protein levels, that they receive a therapeutic diet based on their nutritional situation, and also that they remain properly hydrated. And again, I included this regulation because it's something that I feel we see far too often. It's not uncommon that we're representing a resident who has to go to the hospital for some reason from a nursing home. And it's not uncommon for the hospital to document that someone has dehydration or malnutrition. And this regulation just speaks to the fact that that's unacceptable, that they're supposed to ensure this and to take steps to address this. We hear heartbreaking situations where someone's food tray is just too far for them to reach and they can't feed themselves. I mean, it literally is heartbreaking for me to hear that someone isn't being fed, or they can't reach their food, or they're not reminded or assisted. Not only is that just on a moral level unacceptable, there are regulations that say that that's unacceptable. So moving on now to tips that I feel are important to share with everyone, both during the pandemic and after the pandemic. With respect to visitation, I know that for anyone with a loved one in a nursing home, that visitation, it's been brutal, just brutal this last year. And when I speak to some families, I sense that they're just getting so frustrated and that they don't know what to do. And I'm here to say that even though in-person visitation has been so limited, and we'll speak to that a little bit later, just utilize any visitation avenue that's available to you. Obviously, indoor visitation is preferred. Window visits, I know we're in the middle of winter, that's certainly not as feasible, but any type of internet app that allows for a video visit, utilize that, phone calls, and insist upon that. The guidance from CMS, from the Department of Health, facilities need to be facilitating these things. And if they're not, then pursue the same escalation chain that I spoke about with respect to the other factors today. And the reason that this, even if it's a video visit or a phone call visit, is so important is part of what you were just saying before, Elena, that in speaking to someone on the phone, they can ask, are you being turned? Are you in pain? Are you being changed? And also just to give that person some emotional support by phone or by video visit, and also to observe the person as much as one can to see, do they look well cared for? Are they clean? Is their hair combed? Have they lost weight? Even though it's not optimal, it gives some window into how a person is doing. And so it's important to do that, to insist upon it if it isn't being done, because that's something that facilities should be facilitating for families and residents. The second tip regarding don't leave the room, I did speak about that. Being involved, another tip is to be involved in the resident's care. Ask questions. I know facility staff are very busy. It may not seem that easy to ask questions, but don't let that be a deterrent. Keep asking important questions. Ask those questions if one has them. Also, to attend the care plan meeting. That's something that was done in person pre-pandemic, but those care plan meetings still need to be happening, are required to be happening for residents. And a family member can participate by phone or try by some type of video app during this pandemic time. And with respect to the care plan meetings, again, for a person to be able to request to do that, they would need to have some capacity, meaning they're the healthcare agent, the guardian of the person, or the surrogate decision maker, or again, the resident simply says, yes, I want my husband to participate in that meeting or my son to participate in that meeting. And when I refer to the surrogate decision maker, what I'm referring to is we have something in New York State called the Family Healthcare Decisions Act. And that act was put into place to address a situation where someone is no longer competent to complete a healthcare proxy and someone wants to be their representative. And there's a list of priorities under the act in terms of who has that capacity. So that's really important to know, because even if someone doesn't have a healthcare proxy, someone can step in and be making those decisions and being involved in that person's care. Also, after the care plan meeting, request a copy of the care plan. That's permissible as long, again, as someone has one of those levels of capacity: healthcare agent, guardian of the person, surrogate decision maker. You could request that. And they may say, well, that's a HIPAA situation. You need to fill out an authorization, and that's okay. Read the authorization, make sure it's just an authorization to get medical records. They can charge 75 cents a page for records that are not electronic, but that's important. Get that care plan, because it's good to see what the facility reflects they should be doing for the person. And it's a checks and balances. Also, ask for a list of medications that someone is on. Ask about diet and activities. And those are, again, just ways to stay involved and see what's going on. Also, it's a way to sometimes catch if there's a problem going on. If someone is supposed to be on a diabetic diet and their diet is different than that, it's not everything is perfect. So it's a good checks and balances. Also, with respect to list of medications, sometimes family members will find out that their loved one is on a medication that they weren't aware of, even though that they are supposed to be notified, again, if they have that capacity. Sometimes a resident might be put on a psychotropic medication that the family wasn't aware of and they don't want the person on. And so it's just a good way of overseeing what's going on, and then to have a conversation as to why are they on that medication, and to find out more about what's going on. Also, and this we've sort of covered in different ways, but to look, listen, and smell what while visiting. And I have a separate slide on that, so we'll talk about that more in a moment. Then on the next slide, the continued tips are, if someone feels that a resident isn't being properly cared for, they can ask for a meeting with director of nursing, or if they don't feel that their issues are being addressed, go to the administrator. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy and they're going to get that meeting tomorrow, but be persistent, and again, enlist the ombudsman potentially if someone doesn't feel like they're getting responsive answers to their questions. Also, to go with your gut instinct. Typically, it's a family member that has known someone all their life, and they know that person maybe better than anyone. And it's unfortunate to recount this, but I've had many circumstances with families where they just sensed something was not right, and they insisted upon a transfer to the hospital. And I have to say, in each of those instances, it was warranted. Their loved one came into the hospital with a medical condition that warranted a hospital level of care. And again, that's predicated on the person having capacity to make healthcare decisions for that person. So again, they're the healthcare agent, guardian of the person, surrogate decision maker, and et cetera.
Well, the notion of gut instinct is also, I think, some of what some of these questions are sort of coming up with. Someone who is thinking something's wrong because they're not changing their parent in a timely manner, or their sister, they check her for every 2 hours, but that's not timely from her point of view. So she's saying that this is not sufficient for her care, or concerns that a relative's nails are dirty and their hair looks wrong. What can trigger that escalation? What you're saying is that we have to ask, look, listen, and be vocal about what we're seeing. But these facilities are probably overwhelmed. How do we break through?
Well,
In a COVID-19 world.
Right. It's a very challenging time for everyone involved. But the premise still is, and this hasn't changed, that a nursing home should only accept residents if they can properly care for them. There's been no directive that I'm aware of that they can give substandard care. And so it's not sufficient that they don't have, it's not a sufficient answer to say, we don't have enough staff to do that. And that's pre-pandemic, something that families were told. If, let's say, a wife is visiting her husband and she notices that he's wet, and she'll go to speak to someone and say, can you please change my husband as soon as you can? And they're not saying this second, but can you please change him as soon as you can? And I never used to hear this earlier on, like, 10, 15 years ago, but I have heard this in the last 5 years. The staff literally says, we just don't have enough staff. Mm-hmm. And that's unacceptable. We unfortunately don't have minimum staffing ratios in New York yet. I hope we get them, but they are still required to have adequate staff to care for those residents. And so, and that's not changed amidst this pandemic. Facilities are not to accept patients that they can't care for. So that being said, families should speak to the staff, find out what's going on. And again, I don't profess that anything I'm saying here today is easy to do. I know it's the biggest challenge to have someone in a nursing home, especially now. But the key is, if it's important, and I know, sometimes you have to pick your battles, and if something minor and it's, okay, then you don't make a big deal of that. But if it's something that someone is concerned really speaks to the quality of care, that someone is losing weight, that they're wet, that they're, not being changed, then those are important things that can cause other problems. And so people should do that escalation model, I feel, in terms of trying to speak to different levels of people at the facility. Again, enlist the care of the ombudsman. That's actually
go ahead and talk about that, because I think that's where a lot of people that are questioning are going to be targeting.
Okay. And so the next point was more or less what we just got to about transferring to the hospital. And then that next bullet actually has the number for the Westchester County Ombudsman, which I'll just read out loud in case anyone has trouble seeing it. It's area code 914-500-3406. That's 914-500-3406. And that's again the number for the Westchester County Ombudsman. And they're there, they want to help. And again, they can act as an intermediary between the facility and the family in trying to get some answers if you feel that you have not been able to get those answers on your own. Also, participating in the family council. Every nursing home is required to allow a family council to exist and to meet. And I feel especially now with limited visitation, I have just met and had the opportunity to meet such wonderful family members that have taken on this advocacy role in just phenomenal, effective ways. And with a family council, I always think there's strength in numbers. And so if someone has a concern at a facility, it's possible that another family member may also have that same concern. And people can just sort of talk to each other and maybe see what's helped them achieve something. And so I'm a big proponent of that. Also, there are two websites that one can look to find out more information about facilities. And Medicare has a website, and the New York State Department of Health also has a website where people can find out about history of complaints, inspections, quality indicators with regard to a facility. And these are good resources to use at a couple different levels. Often family members are faced with a situation where, let's say someone fell at home and unfortunately they broke a hip and they went to the hospital and they had surgery and now they need short-term rehab before hopefully returning home. A family may be presented with a list of facilities and said, okay, pick a facility. And especially now, that would be a very daunting prospect because, how do you get that information or make a decision? And one of the things that I always, sometimes families will say, well, I'm trying to pick the closest facility because they want to be able to visit as frequently as possible when you can visit. But it's important not necessarily to choose a facility by proximity. What's more important, in my opinion, especially with respect to what's on the Medicare.gov website, is to look to staffing ratios, not staffing ratios, I'm sorry, staff ratings. Medicare.gov rates different indicators from 1 to 5 stars, five stars being the best. And I think the staffing indicators are, in my opinion, the biggest indicator of the quality of care that a resident is going to be receiving at a particular facility. So take a look at those things at the websites. You can look at, again, as I said, a history of inspections. What's important though when looking at the inspections is look at when that last inspection was done, so that you can have is it a realistic, up-to-date information as to what's actually going on in that facility. So on the next slide, I wanted to provide some information that if a family thinks that neglect or abuse has occurred at a nursing home, where a complaint can be filed with respect to that. So a complaint can be filed both with the New York State Department of Health as well as with the Attorney General's office. So for the New York State Department of Health, in the slide, it indicates that there is a hotline to call for the Department of Health. There's also a complaint form that can be obtained online, and it can be filled out online, or it could be printed and mailed or faxed, and the slide has that information. Also, the New York State Attorney General's office has a Medicaid fraud control unit that a complaint can also be made to. And the slide lists both a general helpline at that office or the Medicaid fraud unit's own number. And similarly, a complaint can be filled out online. Sometimes when people hear the word Medicaid fraud control unit, they may think that the complaint would be appropriate for that unit only if it was some type of financial fraud or something like that on Medicaid. But actually, the name it's a much broader, they have much broader resources there. They're tremendous. They really will, in my experience, they take these complaints very seriously. Some people may be familiar with the report that the Attorney General's office issued maybe a week and a half or so ago with respect to, based upon the complaints that have been made, the investigations they've done during the pandemic, and really speaking to their findings as to what has gone on in nursing homes in the past year.
We'll post that report if we can to the website as well. That sounds actually that would be quite useful. My question with New York, with the nursing home complaint hotline, is that a chance to actually talk to someone? So some of the folks here who have questions, like, is this something that I can complain about, or can you help me complain about it? Does someone helping sort of triage the severity and likely actions, or is it just leave a message and we'll take your complaint down?
My understanding for the New York State Department of Health, I do believe that there is a person answering. That's I haven't, I've called that a long time myself, but I believe there is a person. And with the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, I think it just depends on, my understanding is there's someone that is assigned to that in the office each week or for certain periods of time. And it just depends how busy it is, I think. Sometimes people have to leave a message with that. But, from what the feedback I'm getting, people do get calls back and, the ability to discuss the information. And as with anything, if you don't get a call back in a reasonable amount of time, call again, because it's important, and these complaints are taken very seriously. I really can say that, especially with respect to the Attorney General's office. I really do see that they're taken seriously, and they really want to hear what's going on, because family cannot visit and friends cannot visit the way that they used to. Part of that information gathering is not available. Families provided a very important, in many respects, their visitation was so important, but one of them was just, being eyes and ears, and that isn't possible right now. So the Attorney General's office, wants to know if people are learning about things, and to be able to address that.
Okay, good to know.
And on the next slide, we probably covered most of this already, but just to speak about ways to identify neglect and abuse. And so looking, as we've mentioned, is the resident well cared for? Is their hair combed? Do they look like they lost weight? Do they have bruises or bed sores? I'll never forget a case that, will always be in my mind, about a granddaughter who was visiting her grandmother in a nursing home who had bruises on her hand. And, she saw this on a couple of occasions, and it concerned her. And she was speaking to her grandmother about this. And even though her grandmother had early Alzheimer's disease, she still was able to communicate with her. And she asked her grandmother, she said, what happened to your hand? And her grandmother actually made this hitting motion, and as if someone was hitting her. And that actually goes to the next area of listen. What is the resident saying? Do they have complaints? And the next bullet under listen actually applies in this case as well, that I'm giving you an example of. When the granddaughter was visiting her grandmother, she heard an aide yelling at another resident across the hall, excuse me. So much so that she actually went out to see what was going on, because the aide was really yelling at this person. And the granddaughter was concerned, and there were several other things too, and she was concerned, and she actually put a hidden camera in her grandmother's room. And sadly, she did find that this same aide that was yelling at this resident across the hall was abusing her grandmother. And as a result, we contacted authorities about it, actually Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, and this aide was actually indicted because of that. Charges were brought against her. And that came from looking and came from listening. Also, is the resident, do they have a change in their interest levels? And again, these are some things that, even though people are can't visit in person, that one can still determine just by calling or video app, again, if the person can communicate. And also smell. Sometimes people will say to me, well, it's a nursing home, things are going to smell. And occasionally, yes, if someone has an accident, there's going to be odors, but it shouldn't be a situation where someone gets off the elevator and on a regular basis, the floor always smells of urine. That's not something that's normal or should be happening on a regular occurrence. And so on the next slide, I know that some people may have heard about immunity legislation, and they may feel that, well, because of immunity, these regulations don't apply. And that is not correct. These regulations are applying regardless of immunity legislation that exists. And I just wanted to give a brief overview of what's happened with immunity legislation here in New York. And so back in March of last year, Governor Cuomo issued an executive order that did allow for immunity for physicians, physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, and nurses from immunity from civil liability. I'll just read the area in red. For any injury or death that was alleged to have been sustained as a result of an act or omission by the medical professional in the course of providing medical services that support the state's response to the COVID-19 outbreak. Short while later, on April 2nd of last year, the New York State Legislature passed the Emergency or Disaster Treatment Protection Act. And with this act, immunity was expanded somewhat to healthcare facilities, and healthcare facilities was defined to include nursing homes. This act also included healthcare professionals, which was defined to include CNAs, which are the certified nurses aides that provide a lot of the care in nursing homes. And immunity was also afforded for criminal liability and also for arranging for healthcare services. So it was quite broad, and there's questions as to how broad it was, but it certainly was broadened by this act. And on the next slide, I'm happy to say that in August of last year, the Immunity Act was amended and limited. And so since August 3rd, immunity will now be limited to healthcare professionals or facilities that are actually providing diagnosis or treatment for confirmed and suspected COVID-19 patients. It will not apply to the prevention of COVID or the care of non-COVID patients or the arranging of healthcare services. The amendment that happened in August is not retroactive, but applies immediately for all situations from that date going forward.
Deborah, I just wanted to give you a flag. I've got to get, I know you're going to be talking specifically about visitation and post-vaccine, which is goes to some of the questions folks have, and I want to leave us 5 minutes for some more of the Q&A.
Okay, all right. I will speed up. Okay, that's okay. So with respect to visitation, the most recent CMS guidance and New York State Department of Health guidance came out in September of last year. And as per CMS, the purpose of this guidance was to provide reasonable ways that a nursing home can safely facilitate in-person visitation to address the psychosocial needs of residents. And so the CMS guidance, it does allow for indoor and outdoor visitation. However, the core principles of COVID infection protection must be met. So such things as face coverings, hand hygiene, social distancing, screening someone for symptoms of COVID. And then on the next slide, just speaking to outdoor visitation, excuse me, and indoor visitation. So with respect to the CMS guidance, outdoor visitation is preferred. I understand, again, we're in the middle of winter, so that is a factor in terms of outdoor visitation. But what Medicare said is that facilities should be facilitating at least this outdoor visitation routinely, aside from weather conditions, the individual resident's healthcare condition, or if the facility is going through some type of outbreak status at the moment. with respect to indoor visitation, which I know is the most meaningful thing that people are trying to resume, as per the guidance, CMS basically said that facilities should be doing things to accommodate and support indoor visitation. And that includes reasons beyond compassionate care type situation, including situations for compassionate care, based upon several specific guidance, including that there has been no new onset of COVID in the last 14 days. The facility is not currently conducting outbreak testing, and that the positivity rate is not over 10%. Also, the CMS guidance does allow for in-room visitation if the resident does not have a roommate, and with a roommate if the resident's condition would prevent them from leaving the room, again, as long as these core principles are adhered to. On the next slide, with respect to testing, there's a different, I'll just speak to that quickly. CMS does not say that testing is required. They think it's important if a facility is in a medium or high positivity rate. New York State Department of Health, as many families know, is requiring a negative test within the last 7 days or the last week. One of the things I wanted to spend a little bit of time, if we can, is on compassionate care visits. Because with indoor visits, as I was mentioning in the previous slide, there is the requirement with the 14 days of the facility being free of COVID. And that's been a difficult hurdle, it seems like, to meet, and a frustrating hurdle for families. So with compassionate care visits, one of the important things with respect to the September guidelines that CMS issued was that compassionate care situations does not exclusively refer to end of life. And in the slide, it sets forth some examples of types of situations that would fall under the compassionate care situations. For example, if a resident had been living at home with their family before being admitted to a nursing home, and they're having trouble coping with this change of environment and the lack of physical support, that could qualify as a compassionate care visit. Also, if a resident recently lost a loved one and they're grieving, that would be a basis to allow visitation. Also, if the resident needs cueing or encouragement with eating or drinking, and that was previously provided by a family member or caregiver, and they're now experiencing weight loss or dehydration, that would qualify as compassionate care. Also, a resident who used to talk and interact with others is experiencing emotional distress, seldom speaking or crying more frequently when that wasn't something they did in the past, that could qualify. Also, the New York State guidelines, they refer to medically necessary situations to allow this additional visitation. And an example of that, if a visitor is essential to the care of the patient, or end-of-life situations.
Deborah, so there's some confusion about who's issuing what rules. So CMS says one thing, but there's does New York State override that if Cuomo says this can't be? The New York State Department of Health, how do we navigate this?
It's a good question. It's a challenging question during this time. And from the information that I've been able to obtain about that, because it was a question that I had too, apparently what CMS is issuing in terms of guidelines is considered sub-regulatory, which means that it's not mandatory that the New York State facilities follow it if there's New York guidance that is inconsistent with it. But CMS is clearly saying with these guidelines that they want this to be happening. And they're encouraging states to follow the guidance that they're putting forth. And I think with the New York State and the New York State guidelines, under the medically necessary component, I do think that that's an avenue to advocate for family visitation if, especially in the past, a family member was doing certain things for the resident and now they're no longer, because of the lack of visitation or the prohibition on visitation, able to do that. And I know this is not easy. And I've spoken to many families that, are waging this battle every day. And we've now actually started representing families and trying to get this visitation based on these medically necessary provisions because
someone having Alzheimer's, someone who is not who has dementia, who's not able to sort of care for themselves and is comforted by having family in that assistive role.
and especially I feel when the family was playing an active role in their day-to-day activities before COVID. Because this individual went from having that additional assistance that the family was providing to not having that. And so I think that's an important criteria. And it shouldn't be the only criteria, of course, but I think it helps further the argument if someone was doing that before and obviously have not been able to do that now, and especially if there's a change. I mean, that's really what the CMS guidance is looking at, is if there's now a change. If someone was helping someone eat and now there's weight loss, that's a good example of there has been a deterioration because someone is not able to come in and be able to and to be doing that. And also, I would encourage to contact the Ombudsman also with regard to that. Again, they're an intermediary that may be able to help in terms of navigating some type of arrangement that the facility is comfortable with and that does allow the family to get back in there on some limited basis.
So a consistent theme in the questions you're answering, if there's a concern about this, you're going to have to advocate, you're going to have to speak up and talk to potentially the nurse, the ombudsman, and keep escalating these issues as you go along. There's just also a sort of a consensus set of comments that these places are understaffed. The staff are saying that they're understaffed. In that context, how do you actually make a complaint? Because what can you do? They're all understaffed. They may not have enough PPE. They're all overwhelmed. Where does the advocacy go in this context?
I would file the complaints. I would absolutely file complaints. And based upon the Attorney General's report, they're mindful of that. They're aware of it. They feel that needs to be addressed. And so I would file a complaint with respect to that. And I understand that doesn't change the situation tomorrow, but this information does need to be made known. And the hope is that the more aware that our legislators are even of these situations, through the long-term care community coalition that I'm on the board of, we've been advocating for minimum staffing legislation for decades. One of the hopes that comes out of this horrible year that everyone has lived through is that what is going on, for the problems that go on in nursing homes, that this is an opportunity to hopefully to change things. And I don't in any way mean to say that everything is negative there. There isn't. People are doing, people are working hard, giving essential care, but there are problems as well. And if there are longstanding problems and problems that are going to quality of care, they do need to be addressed. And staffing is a big issue. It was a problem before. It's a problem today.
Especially if the staff won't accept the vaccine or some of the patients. Is there any thoughts on how that's playing out?
Well, I was reading an interesting article last night. It was actually NPR, and it was, my mother got vaccinated. Is it now safe to visit? And it provided a lot of interesting information about, where do we go from here? And, I know a lot of people hope, well, now that residents are being vaccinated, we can start going in next week and visiting. But unfortunately, from what I've read, it's just not that easy. And there are a lot of factors that are still to be taken into consideration. Part of it, what you just said, Elena, that not all residents are being vaccinated, not all staff want to be vaccinated, but also that this is obviously a very vulnerable population. The vaccines are during the trials. They were not noted to be as effective for the elderly as they were for others.
I
And
think
so,
you're noting some of that in your slide here too,
mhm,
about the
yeah,
vaccine.
yeah, thank you. So uh, it's we're making progress. I think to try to end on a positive note, we're making progress. There is a vaccine. Thankfully, the nursing home population is being prioritized for that vaccine, and so that's a good thing. There are bills that have been introduced in the New York State legislature regarding essential caregiver, the rights to visitation for essential caregivers. And I think that's important. It has to be the right legislation, of course, but I do think that that's an important way to get visitation back in so that residents have that. There's a specific formulated way of doing that through a bill would be, I think, important to get passed in our state.
Okay. There was actually a quick question on that point. If someone gets a quick test for COVID and it's positive, they wind up being put in a room with another patient who has COVID. Can they demand another test if they're not showing any symptoms?
It's a great question. And I actually had gotten that question last night, and I did some research on it to try to provide the most helpful answer that I could. And from what I went on the CDC site, the Center for Disease Control and Protection. And from what I was reading on the site, it's preferable that people are in separate, even that are people who are positive are in separate rooms, but it's only if it's feasible at a facility that they can put people in separate rooms. In terms of demanding another test, again, I think it goes to, I didn't find anything on the CDC site that spoke to that, but I do have a phone number, and on the site, it basically said if someone is a healthcare provider with an urgent inquiry or a member of the public with an urgent need for information, they can call this particular number for timely assistance. So I'll give this number out, and
I'll post it with our notes.
Okay, it's 800-232-4636. I'll repeat it, 800-232-4636.
And that's the CDC urgent healthcare provider. And CDC, what number? It's just the CDC number for healthcare providers.
Right, or members of the general public with an urgent information need.
Okay.
And the point with the testing, as with the theme we've had now today, is if a family member is not comfortable with that, if it was a rapid test that was done, then speak to the facility about it. Again, we don't know, the amount of testing, if they have limited testing, that they're able to give another test to the individual, but, speak to the facility about the concerns that that a person is having in an attempt to try to resolve the situation, or again, contact the Ombudsman to see if they might be able to intervene.
Oh, Deborah, this has been just rich information. I know there are a couple of questions still outstanding. We have the email addresses for folks who have provided them, and we'll do our best to return an answer. But you actually have addressed a lot of the issues that have come up, and then some more. Just for this was so rich, I have to sort of make sure we have a couple of key summaries. I think you've told us we have rights and we should know what they are, that we have a path to escalate our concerns. If we're concerned, make sure that we're doing our part as caregiver, as family members, to look, to listen, to smell, to ask, to have all of our senses and try to get information back. Make sure we have certain documents in place. Can we, in fact, do we have the HIPAA clearance? Are we a decision maker for that friend or family maker, for example, to make sure we have any kind of essential paperwork done? And ask for things like the care plan, ask for the list of medications, participate in the meetings, and then speak up. And it's not comfortable to do that in some cases, unless you know someone like me. I'm happy doing it for you. But you have to find someone who can help you in that. My personal experience was always, I never went into a nursing home where a family member was without a list two copies of it, one to leave for the nurse and one that I just went through with. Okay, tell me this, tell me this. You need to organize yourself and feel that and act like you have the rights that you have. And we fortunately have now your presentation. We're going to have your notes and this webinar, and we have the Ask Us button on our website. And I'm just going to jump back to our website if I can. This is going to be a little bit messy. Whoops. Bruce, do you have it handy?
I can bring it up.
Yes, great. Just wanted you to know that we have the Ask Us a Question button on the website. You are encouraged to go back to that site and to ask other questions that may come up. Deborah's contact information was on the last slide of that wonderful presentation, which actually was well organized and has a lot of good information for us to refer to. There are a couple of key phone numbers that were mentioned that we're absolutely going to make sure are included in the notes for this. And just wanted to make sure we brought up the website to, oh, there it goes. I've got it now, Bruce, I can do it. So we're at the Seniorlawday.info website. Here goes that Ask Us button. The webinar is going to be posted where it says our most recent webinar. We'll have that up probably tomorrow, and along with any PowerPoint slides. And I want to make sure that we take this opportunity just also to say two things. We have sponsors. I hope you enjoyed today's program. These organizations have helped to make it possible, and they also are the source of some of the team that answers all of the questions that you may raise to us here by using our Ask Us button. And right now, the registration link for our free consultations on February 17th is open. We're going to leave it open until noon today. We'll open it again on the 7th. The consultations are on the 18th from 10 to 12. And the registration link is going to be open again on the 17th, but it's open right now because you guys are.
So Elena, where do you click though? Where you click right on there? Okay.
Click right on there, and the consultation
I got it. Okay.
form comes up. So I just wanted to make sure that that information was there. And I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you everyone for your active participation. Again, we will respond to any questions that we didn't get to. Deborah, thank you.
And I want to just thank our presenters and moderator. They're welcome.
And Deborah, you're getting some thanks and kudos in the chat, and some concerning things that people are saying about their experiences in nursing homes or with nursing homes. If any of us have worked with them, they're challenging. I'd also flag that there's a webinar on there that I did several months ago on essential online information for older adults. That there's also a pamphlet for that. I start to go through Medicare.gov and had a look at some of that comparative information on nursing homes. And I think I know there's some other resources that we could add to that. So maybe it's time for another addition to our program. I want to work with Deborah on it because I think she's got good information for us.
I'd be glad to do so.
Yay.
It has been an amazing amount of information that we've gotten.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and to answer these questions. And thanks for the great questions that we did get.
Safe, everybody.
Stay safe. Bye.